Meet Swastik. To his millions of YouTube subscribers, he's known as the Night Hunter, a man who makes a career out of walking into the most terrifying places on Earth to prove there is nothing there. Swastik operated on a strict philosophy. To him, ghosts are simply psychological illusions constructed by the human brain when it's afraid. His mission was to dismantle that fear using cold, hard logic. For tonight's livestream, he chose an isolated forest orphanage. 15 years ago, a deadly fire swept through the building, claiming the lives of several children and their elderly caretaker. Swastik's arrival at the ruins followed a drive he could barely remember. He'd briefly mentioned a jarring jolt on the dark forest road, something he dismissed as a pothole, before stepping out of his SUV with his usual absolute confidence to begin the broadcast. He approached the investigation like a scientist. Walking through the dusty corridors, he deployed a network of precise motion sensors and thermometers across multiple rooms to establish a baseline of complete emptiness. Swastik had carefully constructed a perfect, scientifically monitored vacuum. He built a trap designed to capture zero anomalies, without realizing he had just locked himself inside it. At exactly 2:55 a.m., the main interior of the orphanage sat in oppressive silence. Swastik stood in the center of the dark hall, waiting for the dead air to prove his point. Then, a single sharp beep pierced the quiet. One of his motion sensors had triggered in a distant room. Swastik walked over, panned his camera around the empty space, and dismissed the movement as a stray rat. But at exactly 3 a.m., the environment escalated. 3 separate motion sensors, placed in entirely different rooms, triggered at the exact same moment. Swastik rationalized the event as a draft of wind moving through the broken windows. But the steady, calm demeanor he had maintained all night was beginning to show cracks. This graph illustrates the first piece of quantitative evidence his equipment captured at 3:07 a.m. The ambient temperature in the main hall plummeted from 24 degrees down to 16 degrees in a matter of seconds. Right after the temperature drop, the audio anomalies began. The faint, echoing sound of children laughing drifted through the dark corridors. Swastik tried to laugh it off, but his own chat turned against him, filling with accusations that he was piping in fake audio for views. He was no longer fighting ancient local legends. Swastik was now struggling to maintain his own rigid, logical framework while his own measurable data contradicted it. By 3:20 a.m., Swastik was standing in the ruined dining hall, and the anomalies shifted from temperature fluctuations to kinetic movement. Panic started to set in. There was no draft strong enough to push heavy furniture, and Swastik found himself unable to use physics to explain away what was happening in front of him. Then the clock hit 3:33 a.m., and his technology failed. His primary camera screen began to distort, completely filled with crawling digital lines. When the image stabilized, the visual on the monitor showed Swastik's terrified face, but standing directly over his shoulder was a heavily scarred elderly woman wrapped in a white sari. He spun around to find an empty room, but when he looked back at the monitor, she was still there. Her expression had softened into a somber, silent warning. A new notification appeared in the live feed. It was a comment posted from Swastik's own verified account, and it read, "Swastik is already dead." The rational world had vanished. Swastik was facing a physical paradox that his logic could not resolve. Swastik looked down at his own body. His feet were hovering slightly above the floor, and as he raised his hands, they were turning transparent. The caretaker finally spoke, revealing the truth of that jolt on the road. Swastik's physical body never reached the orphanage. A heavy collision with a truck hours earlier had ended his life, but his obsession with the search for truth had carried his consciousness to this finish line. As the truth set in, dark, twisted entities emerged from the shadows of the hall. They were the manifestations of his own stubborn denial, moving in to claim what was left of him. The caretaker reached out and grabbed his fading hand, pulling him away from the shadows. The camera clattered to the ground, and Swastik's soul finally vanished from the room. The next morning, the police arrived at the ruins. They found no trace of Swastik, only his camera, resting on the floor, still broadcasting a live feed of an empty wall. This timeline charts the paradox the police uncovered. The official time of Swastik's fatal car crash was recorded at precisely 2:20 a.m., making the 2:30 a.m. start of the live stream scientifically impossible. But the camera captured one final piece of evidence. Right before the recording cuts to black, there is a single, frozen frame of the old caretaker, staring directly into the lens. The night hunter set out to close the case on the supernatural. Instead, he left behind a digital record of a man who was already gone, the very proof he claimed didn't exist.